less like a room full of lawyers and solicitors, but you know what we're trying to say there. Okay, so we've heard from Paul. He's very clear what his high-level requirements are now. We've seen how he's used those tools to calculate those. But he's now got a problem, in as much that he knows what he wants to achieve, he knows his timescales, but he has no idea whether any of that is actually feasible or how to go about that. So this is now where he's going to turn to our developer for the day, Nick Johns. He'll be working with Nick to look at the affordability of the scheme. Is £4 million going to be sufficient? Are the timescales reasonable? They'll be looking at locations and working through some of those elements of the business case that now need further work in this preparation and brief stage. The final thing that they'll be looking at is the arguments for making this a BIM project or not. So we'll see some debate over what the benefits are of making this project a BIM project, and hopefully for today, they'll come back with a positive conclusion. So on that note, I shall hand over to Nick to take us through stage one.
Okay, well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nick Johns from Nick Johns Developers, and I'm going to be acting as the eyes and the ears of the client for this particular project. So, to recap and summarise my client's requirements in a little more detail, he's currently operating out of a 2,200 square metre building in Enfield, but as he says, he has a problem. He needs additional office space, and he needs it urgently. Now, this is due to the contract they've won, which will result in them recruiting an additional 50 staff over the next 18 months. He has a £4 million budget, and he has a build deadline of 10 months, which is a pretty challenging deadline, to say the least. He has an aspiration to extend his existing building. He likes it. It's served him well in the past, but he will consider all options, and that includes building the same again in a new plot of land, or building something better, but close to his existing office. If we are able to extend his existing building, then he would have to be temporarily relocated while this work was carried out. So he's asked me to check out land development opportunities within the local vicinity also. Now, Paul has made it very clear that this property has to serve its purpose, and his expectations are met in terms of quality, in terms of cost, and in terms of time. So, it's going to take me approximately 2 weeks to understand the client's requirements in more detail, for me to carry out my feasibility study, understand all the options that are available to us, the challenges we'll encounter along the way, and then consideration of some of the technologies that I can use to help me during this process. So, here's the location map, and as indicated by the arrow, here's Sure Things Solicitors. Now, as Paul has alluded to, my initial observation, he's very close to the M25, and there's also 2 train stations there. So in terms of transport links, he's in a pretty good area. But what I'm thinking at the moment, my priority, can I extend his existing building? Can I meet that aspiration? Is it possible? Is it feasible? I also want to gain knowledge of the local area. I want to speak to the local authority to understand potential land development opportunities in the Enfield area where we could build a 2,200 square metre commercial building. I'm also considering the construction costs. Extend the existing building, build something new. How do those costs stack up? And are there contractors available to carry out the work? And more importantly, can they meet that challenging deadline? I'm also thinking at this stage of how do I minimize risk for the client, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. Finally, I'm going to be carrying out some research of the area. I'm looking at roads, looking at the streets, understanding potential construction access routes, and all in all, I need to select the best option for the client to suit his circumstances, to suit his requirements, and meet those expectations. So, here's the existing building, Sure Things Solicitors. the first thing that I want to do, and I'm going to do, is to carry out a survey on this existing building. I want to understand in more detail the size, the shape, definition, and layout. And I'm also thinking at this stage, what's the best structure to build in? Should it be a concrete frame, or should it be a steel frame? And if it was a steel frame, and I was going to extend that existing building, then the steel frame is a good option due to the existing foundations, and that it will also tie in to the main frame. Okay, as I say, I want to acquire a real feel for the existing building because I know the client really likes it. So, I'm going to survey the building using a drone, or an unmanned aerial vehicle as it's sometimes called. Now here's our drone in operation, and you can see here that underneath the carriage of this drone, we can host a digital camera or a point cloud scanning device. And the advantages of this, we can see the building from places, views, and angles we wouldn't usually be able to see. Now you can see the drone is going up and over the building, so I can get a good top-down view, an idea of the true angles, definition, and shape. Now a key benefit of this is not just the photographs, but by using Autodesk Recap, I can build all of these photos out of the camera and bind it into the point cloud, which I took previously. And as you can see, the photographic images and point cloud has come together, and I'm going to use this later on for other things. But what this does give me, it gives me true, accurate dimensions and views which I just wouldn't have acquired if I didn't have access to this technology. Now, the point cloud is an image made up of millions and millions of dots, and this is how I'm able to acquire those true, accurate measurements, which we're going to see in more detail later. Now, I can also use this in multiple platforms, such as Revit, such as Navisworks, and I can view in Recap. And you're going to see some of this technology being used during the day by different people on this particular project. So this is a real key tool to start today's session and to see how and what we're going to use this information for. Okay, so in the previous video, you saw me capturing photographic images and bind it into the point cloud. What I'm going to do now is to use Autodesk Recap, which I talked about in the previous video, and this will allow me to bring in that point cloud, but view it and use it for many different things. Now you can see here that the platform is quite a simple, basic platform, and it's just using that point cloud information. However, what is really key is that the point cloud won't just be one image. It will be several images that we need to bind together to create the full environment that we're going to be looking at. Now, there's some key things here. We can use the measurement tools to take a measurement. We can actually snap on directly to each point in the point cloud. We've already had a good look around the building, and I'm going to snap onto that point cloud point just there, and I've got my first measurement. The building is just over 16 meters wide. Again, I can now manipulate, spin that building around, and get to a view where I can see how long that building is, and take another measurement. So once again, I'm just going to snap onto that point cloud point there, and I can see it's just over 68 meters in length. Now I can also capture the height of the building as well, which is just over 8 meters. Now these are things I would have traditionally gone out to site to survey, but because of the technology, I'm not just getting measurements. I can see what's on the plant room roof. I can measure lots of different things if I want to acquire more information regarding the existing building. And if you remember, that was one of the client's key requests. Can we extend the existing building or replicate it in a new plot of land? Now, I can also make notes for my whole team who will be supporting me on this project, as I may want to go out to other stakeholders who, rather than go into site, they too can use this technology and take measurements which reflects their requirements. Okay, so you saw that we used Recap to bring the images together, and I've indexed the raw information that's going to come from the point cloud. What we've done now is, because we've indexed it in such a way, then we can start using it in our own design tools. So my in-house design team can now start helping me look at all this information in true design tools such as Revit. We're now using it not just for viewing, but I can now use this as the start and the basis to start modeling that building and also start using it to convey information that I want to get over to the planners or the local authorities, which can support us in our ongoing discussions. You can see it's a very similar viewing engine to what we've looked at Recap. However, we have a lot more tools and a lot more flexibility within Revit to manage this information. But firstly, we have to manage how this information is set up within the system itself. So first, I'm looking where the north is. Because Revit prefers to work in straight lines, it's going to be very awkward to work at the angle that the image is currently set at. We're going to set the location, and that will pick up the site and weather data, and I want to set that now, because that can be used by others later on in the project. So I'm just about to set it on the Enfield site, and there we go. We've got the true location, and we've got a little indicator to show where it is. Now I'm going to now look at rotating the image to suit other things that we're going to be doing. So again, we need to define Project North. We're going to use the Rotate tool. And you can see that I'm snapping on to the point cloud point. So I'm not just guessing, it's snapping on. So I'm getting a true alignment. And there we go. We're now square, and we can start using this for other things within the project. So we've now set the point cloud in Revit, and you can now see by using simple floor plan views in Revit, I've actually now got the tools to start drawing around this. And it's going to be so important to be able to snap on to these point cloud points here. So I've just picked up a basic wall, and I'm going to be snapping onto the points to get a true representation of that building. So we're just snapping just there, and we're going to come down to here, and just snap on just there. Okay, perfect. I now have a 3D representation of that building, but I know it's to scale. So I can now start using this for other things, such as planning packs, which I can forward to the architect, or information that I can pass over to the local authority. So as you've seen, I've now got a good understanding of that existing building, just in case we need to build it. But what I want to do now is to gain an understanding of the land around it. So you can see here, I'm just using simple Google Maps. And there you go, you can see the area of the existing building, but also you can see the 2 new plots of land that the local authority has said that is available in that location. So we have the smaller plot of land there and the larger plot of land there. So I'm just using Google Maps to get a good understanding of that area. So I'm now going to be going into street views, and what I'm doing here is checking for access, checking to see there will be no obstacles that will prevent me from getting planning permission. And it's all looking pretty good so far. You can see the development site here on the left, and it's directly opposite the Premier Inn here on the right. Now, that's potentially very interesting, because that will mean there's lots of different people, maybe business people, that will be frequenting the area, and this could be a good place to have a new office. So that's quite useful information. So I'm going to capture that information in that screenshot, and that's going to be really useful for when I speak to the local authorities. I can demonstrate that I've taken into consideration that there is a potential main access route for all the construction materials coming on site. So let's just keep looking around, shall we? So I'm now checking for road widths, I'm checking for low bridges, any potential restrictions which would inhibit the construction project moving forward. It's looking pretty good to me so far, so I'm going to capture that screenshot as well, and I'm going to save that with the other screenshot. So I'm happy with that. I'm very comfortable with that. So I'm going to come out of this now, and we're going to start to look at the new plots of land. And I'm going to capture these images as well, as I will be using them later on, and you'll be able to see where I use them later. Now, this is really important, because I can get these to scale and start putting information on top of these, just so when we get in front of that local authority, we can explain our thoughts for the development and articulate what we're planning to do going forward. Now, in the past, I've struggled to do this, as I would have had to go to site to survey the area and also get the topographical maps from the local authorities. However, by doing it this way, we've just used standard design tools. One other point to note, as I've captured the aerial view, I've also captured the scale bar, and that's going to be very important. So let's see what we do with this. Okay, so this is just standard AutoCAD, and what I can do now is to start attaching these images in here. So we've brought one in, and we're just going to bring the second image in as well that we captured. Now, it's not to scale at the moment, so I'm bringing the 3 images in, which I've captured straight off Google Maps, and there we go. So what I've got to do now is to start looking at binding these together. Now, remember, I captured the scale bar. There's the scale bar. And what I can do now is to get quite accurate the length of that. So I'm going to draw a 50-meter line. There's the line. And just coming back to those images there, what I can now do, by using the scale just within AutoCAD, I can scale up the 3 images relative to the line that I've just drawn. So I can snap onto that point there, and say the length there is the scale equal to the length of that line, and I can snap onto the end point of that, just there, and what I have now is 3 images of the site. However, it's not just an image now, it's a scaled image, which is very important, as this means I can measure the access routes, measure the surrounding areas, measure how much space I've got from a building to a road. I can also align these images as they're fragmented at the moment. So you see by looking at this process here, I'm aligning one corner of the building to another, and I'm going to align that corner to there, and I'm just going to let that process run through. Okay, so we go from corner to corner there, that's great. And this is going to drag that image over the top of the other one. Excellent. Now this is great, because I can now capture the whole site larger than the resolution I initially captured the images at. And this is going to be really helpful in my ongoing discussions with the local authority. If I just use a reference point of that building just there, and then picking 2 points which are relative, then this also will align these images together. So again, we're just going from one corner to another, and I'm just going to let that process run through as well and complete. And again, great. I now have another way of finding this information. Like we did with the point clouds in the past, if I didn't have a drone or a laser scanner, then this is another way that I could have done it. Just using standard AutoCAD tools to look at the existing building. That's great. Okay, I'm happy with that. So I can set a new layer up, so I can color it and see where we are. So I'm going to use this to look at the proposed building. Just going to create that layer there. And then I'm going to switch the color to magenta. That's perfect. And then by using standard polyline commands, I can draw around the existing building and get the size of it. Now remember, the client has this aspiration to extend the existing building. But what I want to know is what happens to this building on that site? Is it possible to extend? So I'm going to select it in a minute, and I'm going to use the standard move command to see whether it will actually fit on the existing site. So I'm just going to let that process finish there. Okay, that's it. There we go. And we're going to select, and we're going to move. So I'm just looking just there. Space is pretty tight between the surrounding buildings. Can't really extend width-wise there. Can I go up the top? Am I able to rotate it 90 degrees? Does that work? I can go perpendicular. I don't think that's going to work either due to the curvature of the roundabout at the top. And I don't think extending the existing building is going to be a viable option. Regardless of cost, regardless of aesthetics, regardless of the desire from the client, I think we're going to really struggle. So let's just look at this new site. And let's look specifically at the larger plot where we took the street maps from. And yeah, this is more like it. Excellent. We have land, we have space, we can place it anywhere, and importantly, we have options. To enhance the stakeholder engagement, I wanted to show you some technologies which we could use at this stage or later on when we're getting into creating mass models, and that's virtual and augmented reality. Now, these are technologies which I can use to navigate the local authority and the client through the proposed project. Now, virtual reality will give the client and the authority a fully immersive experience, and as you can see, it's usually achieved by the wearing of a virtual reality helmet or goggles like the Oculus Rift. Now, this will allow us to experience the proposed project in a far more accurate and holistic way that was never before possible, basing our experiences inside the headset before work has even started. I can also use augmented reality to understand how our building will look in existing conditions, and this will give me a live, copied view of a physical real-world environment whose elements have been augmented. And by showing the local authority the proposed building in this context, then it just conveys a much better appreciation of how that building will look in existing conditions. And both of these technologies will, without doubt, become increasingly important, powerful tools for me to use on my projects going forward. Okay, so we've carried out a survey on the client's existing building, and we know, due to the extension restrictions, we are able to go with a new build. I have confidence that the contractors are available and they can meet the agreed timescales. I still need to consider whether we're going to go with a concrete frame or a steel frame, and I need to acquire costs from the contractors for both options. Now, I mentioned earlier on that I'm looking at minimizing risk for the client. And the risk I'm thinking of at this moment is if the client was to downsize and sell in the future, what's the target market if the building was sold on? So I'm having conversations with real estate agents in the area to understand the demand for different types of buildings in the vicinity. So let's look at the build options. Steel frame, concrete frame. I've received various quotations and levels of pricing from several contractors. However, I have spoken to one specific contractor who has quoted me a price to build in a concrete frame, £3.9 million, and to build in a steel frame, £3.7 million. So from a cost perspective, steel is looking a good option at this stage. I've also received various build times from several contractors, but again, I've been speaking to this same contractor who has said he could build in concrete around 38 weeks and with a steel frame around 34 weeks. So for me, steel ticks the boxes in terms of cost and time to construct. And I'm pretty pleased with that, to be quite truthful, because with steel, it allows open space. It gives the client flexibility for future expansion. Importantly, it allows off-site construction and fabrication of frames. And I know that my clients and myself are going to be very pleased about that from a sustainability perspective. I've now completed my feasibility study and have now spoken with the client. And I've discussed both options, extending his existing building, building something new. And I explained to the client that whilst extending his existing building would incur no extra land fees, he could see, just by looking at these images you can see on screen, we would really struggle with size. He could see that we couldn't extend his existing building due to the lack of space between the surrounding buildings, just the lack of parking. He would also have to consider temporary relocation if we did have that opportunity to extend, so be an extra cost to him. And also, I explained that the cost to construct a new build would be the same as the cost of the extension. The difference is pretty negligible, but he would also have that additional cost of refurbishment. So, I showed the client these sites. We have the smaller plot of land on the left and the larger plot of land on the right. So let's have a look at these individually. So, the larger plot of land here, we could have built something twice as big for the client. We could have built something 4,400 square meters. We could have pulled all of his employees, put them into that building, and also the 50 that he's going to be recruiting over the next 18 months, out of the existing building, put them in this building, and then the 50 they're going to recruit over the next 18 months, we could house them in there as well. However, the land was much more expensive. It was prohibitive, and it didn't meet the customer's cost parameters. Also, I mentioned the benefit of being across the road from the Premier Inn. However, that particular road is very, very noisy, and it gets congested at key times. So my recommendation, I just didn't think that was the right option for him. However, this was much more like it, in my opinion. I showed him this existing plot, this smaller plot, that is adjacent to the existing building. Now, this is much more acceptable to the client in terms of costs. It has parking, it has good access, and it's close to his existing building, which would reduce walking downtime for meetings, etc. And I also worked up a plan to show him this and how we could replicate his existing building into this smaller plot of land and with parking. Now, subject to final planning approval, the local authority have accepted the existing road as the main construction access route. There are no restrictions, no low bridges, no narrow roads, no weight limits. What I also recommended to the client is that we use BIM on this project. Now, there are a number of clear benefits of using BIM in terms of reducing waste, reducing risk, the sustainability and environmental considerations, which is really important. However, what is also very important, the client will get cost certainty. There is a potential saving of 10 to 50%, not only on the design and construction costs, which is relatively modest in comparison to the much larger cost saving on the building lifecycle costs. And these are industry-proven cost savings when BIM is applied on construction projects. I also recommended that we hire a consultant to help us put together an Employer's Information Requirement Document, or EIR. Now, this will ensure that the client's design, build, manage requirements or expectations are fully captured and documented. And the consultant will help us provide some clarity and support going forward in key areas like data and information exchange. And you're going to hear a lot about data during the day, but the data is going to be so important to the client on an ongoing basis when this building is handed over to him. So it's absolutely key this data is captured throughout the construction process. I'm going to recommend full Revit delivery in terms of design. I've worked on projects with Revit before. I find Revit to be a smooth managed process in terms of design. It allows collaboration. It's also bi-directional in terms of data. And importantly, it links into the client's existing CAFM FX 360 system. I'm also going to define key dates in the EIR for when the client wants to see the data and also models of the virtual construction as the project moves forward. I'm also going to recommend, and I have recommended, that we define and specify the data the client wants to see and use in his spaces management and asset management system. Now, as we say, we do have poetic license, and the client is accepted. Yay, fantastic news. So, what's my next steps? I now need to go out to tender and appoint a multidisciplinary design house. I'm going to put together a tender pack, which will include all the client's requirements, all the data which we've collated during this process. We're going to specify Revit in terms of design. We're going to specify BIM for the project. We're going to specify that we need an employer's information requirement document. We're going to specify all the data that we want to see. But importantly also, I'm going to specify that we have a BIM execution plan. Now, the BIM execution plan will give myself and the client the confidence that the successful architect will have everything structured and his team are fully aware of the deliverables of this project. So, to summarize, what were the customer's expectations? Well, cost was an issue. £4 million budget. I'm pretty confident we'll be within budget. Quality. Well, we're going to design the same building again. We know he likes that building, so I'm pretty happy that we'll get the quality right. Time. We had a 10-month time. I'm being told by the contractor that I may be working with that they can do this in 34 weeks. And finally, I will go back to the data handover. The collation of data and information throughout the design and build process is going to be so important to the client going forward, specifically when the building is handed over to him and when the building is in use. Thank you very much.